Wow, you sent over a ton of news reports about this Democratic clash over government funding. Looks like you're really interested in how this is all unfolding.
Yeah, it's definitely been a pretty fascinating and honestly kind of messy situation to watch unfold.
It has. So, to really get into it today, we're going to deep dive into this whole showdown between Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and, well, a pretty significant chunk of his own party.
Right. And at the heart of it all is Schumer's decision to support a Republican-backed spending bill, which, on the surface might not sound like a huge deal, but
It was to prevent a government shutdown,
yeah.
and a lot of Democrats are really not happy about how he handled it.
Yeah, they are not happy at all. So we're going to break down why Schumer did what his critics are saying and what this all might mean for the Democrats moving forward.
And for all of us, honestly. Because a government shutdown, or even just the threat of one, can have some pretty real consequences.
Absolutely. It can affect everything from essential services to, people's paychecks to the overall economy. So this is definitely something that goes way beyond just the political maneuvering in Washington.
It does. So to really understand the context here,
Yeah.
we need to go back to March of 2025. That's when this whole thing really kicked off.
Right. The clock was ticking down to a potential government shutdown, and House Republicans, they'd already passed their version of a funding bill.
Which is called, what, a continuing resolution, right?
Exactly, a continuing resolution or a CR. And basically, it just keeps the government running at the same funding levels for a set amount of time, usually to buy them more time to negotiate a longer-term budget.
And Senate Democrats, they came back with their own proposal, right?
They did. They initially wanted a shorter-term funding extension just to kind of kick the can down the road a bit and give them more time to negotiate.
But then Schumer, he basically switched sides and decided to go with the Republican plan.
Which is what really set off all this drama within the Democratic Party.
Okay, so let's get into Schumer's head here. What was his reasoning for making that move?
Well, the biggest thing he kept saying over and over was that a government shutdown would be absolutely disastrous. He even said it would be like 10 or 20 times worse, or even 15 or 20 times worse than just accepting the Republican bill.
I mean, those are some pretty strong words. 15 or 20 times worse than a bill he clearly didn't love. It sounds like he saw a shutdown as a truly catastrophic scenario.
Yeah, he really did. And he also felt like the Democrats were going into this fight with a pretty weak hand. They just didn't have the leverage to get any meaningful concessions from the Republicans.
I remember him saying something like there was no leverage point that we could ask for things, they just would have said no.
Exactly. He basically felt like any attempt to push harder for Democratic priorities would have just resulted in a shutdown and nothing else.
So he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
It seems that way, and to make things even more complicated, he was really worried about what a future Trump administration might do if there was a shutdown.
All right, Trump hadn't officially announced another run yet, but it was pretty much assumed at this point that he was going to try and get back in the White House.
Exactly, and Schumer was basically arguing that a shutdown would give Trump and his allies a perfect opportunity to really slash and burn the government.
He even brought up Elon Musk and his idea for a Department of Government Efficiency, didn't he?
He did, and not in a good way. Schumer seemed convinced that Musk and others would use a shutdown to push for huge cuts to federal agencies and programs.
And he specifically mentioned some programs that could have been hit really hard, right?
Yeah, he was particularly worried about SNP, the Food Assistance Program for Low-Income Families, and mass transit.
Which are often the first things to get cut or scaled back during a shutdown.
Right, because they're not always seen as essential, even though they're obviously vital to a lot of people.
So it sounds like Schumer was painting a pretty bleak picture of what could happen if the government shut down.
He was. And it's important to remember that even the threat of a shutdown can have a real impact on the economy. People start to worry. Businesses hold back on investments. And it just creates a lot of uncertainty.
So it's not just about the shutdown itself, it's about the ripple effects.
Right. And Schumer seems to have been really focused on avoiding all of that, even if it meant making a deal that wasn't popular with his own party.
Which brings us to the backlash, because a lot of Democrats were furious about this decision.
Yeah, there was a lot of anger and frustration directed at Schumer.
And one of the most vocal critics was Nancy Pelosi, right?
Absolutely. She basically accused Schumer of giving in to the Republicans without getting anything in return.
I think her exact words were, "I myself don't give away anything for nothing," which is a pretty clear message.
It is. She was essentially saying that Schumer should have fought harder and at least tried to get some concessions from the Republicans, even if it meant a shutdown.
And she even suggested that maybe there was a third option, a different approach that Schumer could have taken.
Right, like maybe trying to force the Republicans to publicly reject a Democratic proposal, even if it didn't ultimately change the outcome.
So it's not just about the final result. It's also about the strategy and how you play the game.
Exactly. And Pelosi clearly felt like Schumer didn't play it very well.
And she wasn't alone. There were a lot of other Democrats who were pretty outspoken in their criticism.
Yeah, it went way beyond just grumbling behind closed doors. There were some pretty public calls for Schumer to step down as leader.
I remember Representative Glenn Ivey being one of the first to say that publicly he basically said, it may be time for Senate Democrats to get a new leader.
Yeah, that was a pretty big moment. It really showed how deep the dissatisfaction was.
And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she also had some pretty strong words for Schumer.
Oh, yeah, she called his decision an acquiesce and a slap in the face to House Democrats who had voted against the Republican bill.
Especially those who were in districts that heavily favored Trump. You know, they took a big risk by going against their own party.
Right, and they felt like Schumer didn't have their backs.
So this wasn't just some abstract political debate. It had real consequences for those House members.
It did, and it really highlighted the tension between the different factions within the Democratic Party.
And it wasn't just limited to Congress either. There were reports of Democratic voters confronting their senators at town hall meetings.
Yeah, people were really angry. They felt like Schumer had let them down.
And even Senator Michael Bennet, he admitted that there were internal discussions happening about leadership changes.
Which suggests that this wasn't just a temporary blip. This could have some long-term implications for the Democratic Party.
So it really raises the question of how unified the Democrats are and if they can present a united front against the Republicans.
And this is where Bernie Sanders comes in because he had a slightly different take on the whole situation.
He did. He went beyond just criticizing Schumer's decision and basically argued that there was a bigger problem at play.
Right. He was saying that the Democratic Party had become too beholden to wealthy donors and out of touch with the needs of everyday people.
So for him, this was more than just a disagreement over one particular bill. It was about the direction of the party as a whole.
Exactly. He was saying that the Democrats needed to get back to their roots and fight for the working class.
Which is a message that's resonated with a lot of progressive voters.
It has, and it's something that the Democrats are going to have to grapple with as they try to figure out their strategy for the future.
So despite all this pressure and criticism, what was Schumer's response?
Well, he was pretty defiant. He flat out said, I'm not stepping down. And he basically dismissed any comparisons to the pressure that Biden faced.
So he's not backing down. He's standing by his decision.
He is, and he's also trying to project an image of unity within the Democratic Party.
Even though it's pretty clear that there are some deep divisions.
Right. He kept saying that the Democrats were united in their opposition to Trump.
Which might be true on a broad level, but it doesn't really address the very real disagreements within the party.
No, it doesn't. But it's a message that he's clearly trying to push.
Okay, so to recap the timeline here. The House Republicans passed their funding bill in early March. Then the Senate Democrats countered with their own proposal around mid-March.
And then in the week leading up to March 23rd, Schumer and a small group of Senate Democrats decided to go with the Republican plan.
Which is when all the criticism from Pelosi, Ivey, and Ocasio-Cortez started coming out.
Right. And then on March 23rd, Schumer went on a bunch of news shows to defend himself and say that he wasn't resigning.
And that's also when Sanders and Bennet weighed in with their perspectives.
And Trump, he actually praised Schumer for his decision, which probably didn't help matters.
It probably made things even more complicated for the Democrats.
Yeah, it did. But it also shows how unpredictable the political landscape can be.
It does. So if we try to summarize the two main sides of this debate, on one hand, you have Schumer and those who agree with him. They were really focused on preventing a shutdown.
They saw it as the lesser of two evils, and they didn't think they had the leverage to get a better deal from the Republicans.
So it was a pragmatic decision based on the circumstances?
Yeah. Exactly. And then on the other side, you have the critics who felt like Schumer gave up too much and didn't fight hard enough. They thought he should have taken a more confrontational approach, even if it meant risking a shutdown.
So it really comes down to a difference in strategy and philosophy.
It does, and it's a debate that's going to continue to play out within the Democratic Party.
So for you, the big takeaway here is that this whole fight over the funding bill really exposed some fundamental tensions within the Democratic Party.
Yeah, it showed that there's a real disagreement about how to approach the Republicans and how to deal with a potential Trump presidency.
You've got the pragmatists like Schumer who are focused on avoiding the worst-case scenario, and then you've got the more progressive wing of the party who want to see the Democrats take a more aggressive stance.
And it's not clear which side is going to win out in the long run.
It's not. This whole episode really raises a lot of questions about the future of the Democratic Party and how they're going to navigate the challenges ahead.
It does, and it'll be interesting to see how this internal conflict plays out in the coming months and years.
Okay, so for everyone listening here, some things to think about as you follow this story. What are the long-term consequences of this very public division within the Democratic Party? Could this weaken their position in future negotiations with the Republicans? And will this ultimately lead to a change in leadership?
And what about Trump's praise for Schumer? What does that tell us about the political calculations going on behind the scenes? This whole situation is a reminder that politics is a complex game with a lot of moving parts, and it's not always easy to predict what's going to happen next.
It's not, but by understanding the different perspectives and the key arguments at play, we can start to make sense of it all.
Exactly, and that's what we've tried to do here today.
We have, so for our listeners, the next time you see a headline about a government shutdown or a political clash, take a moment to think about the deeper dynamics at work.
Because there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
There is, and that's what makes politics so fascinating.
It's never boring, that's for sure.
Absolutely.